plates, briefly clean, were stacked in teetering towers by the sink. Gerard waded through them like a man making his way upriver, snapping his towel at a particularly stubborn bit of dried sauce, muttering curses under his breath in a dialect thick as stew. Sylvie perched on a stool near the pass, one foot hooked on a lower rung, the other stretched out in front of her. A nearly empty coffee cup sat by her elbow, lipstick marks encircling the rim like faint petals. Her cigarette rested on the edge of an overflowing ashtray, smoke drawing a straight line upward before spreading under the greasy hood like a lazy ghost. Big Marcel leaned back against the counter, a damp towel draped over his massive shoulder. His cap had migrated to a hook on the wall, revealing hair flattening with sweat. He smoked in slow, thoughtful drags, each exhale hanging in the warm air. The radio hummed softly in the background, a presenter talking about football scores with reverence. Jean-Luc stood at his now mostly clean station, wiping down the stovetop with a rag that had seen better centuries. His arms felt like they belonged to someone who'd been carrying buckets of sand up a hill all day. His fingers ached, the skin on his knuckles reddened from the cheap soap and hot water. He knew this kind of exhaustion. It was different in a young body, though. Sharper, less muffled. His muscles buzzed faintly, like a wire pulling too much current. On the long metal shelf above the pass, a few coins pressed under inverted coffee cups marked the tips truckers had left for the kitchen. A rare kindness. Usually all gratitude in places like this went to the woman bringing the plates, not to the invisible hands that made the food. But today, a handful of truckers had made a point of thumbing a franc or two under Sylvie's nose and jerking their head toward the kitchen. She'd looked at the money, then at Jean-Luc, then at Marcel. Without a word, she'd slid half the coins down the shelf, letting them jingle to a stop above the egg station. "Don't get used to it," she said when he glanced up, catching her eyes. "Most days you just get yelled at." "By you," he replied, surprising himself. Her lips twitched. "Me? Never. I'm an angel." Now, as he worked at a stubborn streak of burnt egg, the kitchen's noise had dropped to a low murmur. Plates clinked, water ran, cigarettes burned. Outside, a truck engine coughed to life, then settled into a steady rumble. On the other side of the thin wall, the dining room had emptied of human voices, replaced by the background drone of the road. A stray jukebox song drifted through, something slow and wistful that didn't fit the place at all. Inside, grease and steam clung to every surface. The light had shifted with the day, turning the yellow bulbs almost orange. He wiped, then wrung out his rag in a nearby bucket. The water was gray, opaque. When he squeezed, the rag bled brown and gold, bits of egg white clinging stubbornly, refusing to let go. The bucket smelled like every meal ever cooked here. "You did well," Gerard said suddenly, from the sink. Jean-Luc glanced over, surprised. The old man rarely used extra words. Gerard didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the plates crashing into their racks. Most boys' first day the eggs fight back, end up with scrambled on the ceiling and shells in every bite. The eggs listened. They were fresh enough, Jean-Luc said, because he didn't know how to explain that it hadn't been the eggs listening, but some part of him he still didn't understand. "Fresh doesn't make them obedient," Gerard said dryly. He jerked his chin toward the pass. "You hear them out there? Truckers don't shut up when they're unhappy. Today they were quiet when they eat. That's rare." Sylvie exhaled a stream of smoke, watching it curl. "They'll come back," she said. "Tell the others. Go to the gutter. There's a kid making eggs like a priest blesses children." "Priests don't use that much butter," Marcel grunted. But there was a faint glint in his eyes, something like pride, carefully hidden so it couldn't be used against him later. Jean-Luc let the words drift over him. Praise, in a way. Not the fan letters, reviews, or Michelin notes that had once fed his ego, but smaller and immediate. It settled differently, not as a crown, but as a warm coal tucked under his ribs. A flicker of hope, he realized. That's what it was. Annoying and fast. Almost on its own, his mind slid back onto old tracks. Could he climb from here? How long until this new name meant something again? What kitchens could he infiltrate? What menus could he bend? Then his current facts elbowed in. 12 francs, a rusted knife, a mattress with opinions about mold. Ambition didn't vanish. It just narrowed its eyes and waited. He focused on his rag. Near the doorway that led to a tiny back room doubling as storage and staff corner, Sylvie and Gerard had drifted together. This was their favorite place and favorite time for complaining about bosses and customers. Today their voices were low, almost conspiratorial. "I'm telling you, they lost someone important," Sylvie was saying, voice pitched just above the hiss of the steam. "Last week, all the talk at L'Etoile Noire was, 'Have you heard about Lilith?' Chef walked out. Sous-chef had a fit. The whole brigade, poof, chaos." "Lilith?" Gerard snorted, dropping another rack of glasses into the rinse. "That place with the blue door and wine more expensive than my rent? They always in chaos. It's their style. They call it innovation." "Lite," Sylvie spelled out, waving her cigarette like a wand. "Uptown. Fancy bistro, 1 star in the Red Book. The kind of place where if you ask for ketchup, they call the police." "My cousin did plumbing there once," Gerard grumbled. "He said their pipes were full of bones." "Chicken bones," she clarified, rolling her eyes. "You act like it's some witch's den." Jean-Luc's hand paused mid-wipe. The name wrapped around his spine and cold. Lilith. He knew of it, of course. In his previous life, he'd filed it somewhere between promising regional and trying too hard. A star, yes, but a baby one. Terrified of losing its little glimmer in the guide. Now, from the basement of the world, even a trembling star felt blinding. "They're desperate," Sylvie continued, lowering her voice slightly, even though there was no one around to tattle. "That's the point. Heard it from Pierre. He drives for one of their suppliers. Said the owner is begging for new hands. Anybody who can hold a knife and not cry when the chef screams." "Sounds like half the boys in this city," Gerard said. "The other half already working for chefs who scream. Why you care?" "Because desperate means they'll overlook things," Sylvie said. She flicked ash expertly into the tray, the tiny gray cylinder landing neatly between 2 others. "No big names needed, no fancy schools. You just show up, say you can cook, they might even listen." Jean-Luc's pulse picked up. His ears sharpened, catching every nuance of tone in her words. The mention of overlook things felt like a door left ajar in a corridor that had always been bolted shut to him. He turned slightly, rag hanging from one hand, pretending to scrape at an already clean patch of stove. Gerard grumbled, "Or they chew you up and spit you out like gristle. Those places, they don't play. Here, you burn an egg, truckers swear at you, Marcel throws a pan. There, you burn a sauce, they carve your soul out with a spoon." "Better than rotting in grease," Sylvie countered. "Come on, you never wondered what it's like up there with the polished forks and the 3 different sizes of wine glasses? They probably have napkins like clouds." Gerard shrugged, the motion making his entire torso rise and fall. "Clouds leak. I don't like things that leak." She huffed. "You're impossible." She reached into her apron pocket, fingers fishing amid crumpled tickets and stray sugar packets. When her hand emerged, it held a folded piece of paper, slightly less stained than the rest of her belongings. She smoothed it on her knee. Even from a few meters away, Jean-Luc recognized the texture of the paper, the thickness. Not hand-scrawled this time. A photocopy flyer, words printed bold. "See," she said, tilting it toward Gerard. "Look, looking for a commis, chef de partie, dishwasher, all of them. High turnover, big problem, my friend, and desperate problems need desperate solutions." Gerard leaned closer, one wet, soapy hand hovering carefully above the paper, as if afraid his touch alone might smudge away opportunity. "Aren't you tempted, Sylvie?" he asked, half mocking. "Leave us, go serve real knives and real napkins." She snorted. "Me? They'd eat me alive the first time I called a client my dear and wiped a glass on my apron. No, I'm a gutter girl till I die." She blew smoke out the side of her mouth, but her eyes lingered a second too long on the flyer. Jean-Luc swallowed. His throat felt drier than before, though the air was humid. Sylvie must have sensed his staring. She glanced over, catching him mid-pretend scrub. Her gaze cooled reflexively, the softness from earlier wrapped in sharper paper. "You snooping kid?" she called. "We talking about another universe. They don't take boys who smell like truck stop eggs." "I don't smell like eggs," he said almost reflexively. "I smell like burnt coffee and fear." Gerard barked out a laugh. Even Marcel's mouth twitched. Gerard said, "He might survive." Sylvie rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth tipped up. She held the flyer between 2 nicotine-yellowed fingers, considering something for a heartbeat. Then she walked over. Up close, She smelled of threshold places, cigarette smoke, cheap perfume, black coffee, and starch. Life lived between kitchen and dining room, between insults and flirtation. Here, she said, dropping it on his station, for when you get bored of impressing men in dirty overalls. He looked down. L'Elite Restaurant Lyon, declared the header in bold letters. Underneath, smaller text. Seeking motivated kitchen staff, willing to train, competitive environment. Bring your knives and your courage. The address sat below. He knew the street. Central, expensive, the part of town where stone buildings stood straighter, and windows shone with money-cleaned glass. The step up from La Gutter was not a step, but a staircase. He picked up the flyer. The paper crackled between his fingers. It was heavier stock than the name implied. Serious paper. You think I could survive real knives? He asked, half teasing, half not. Sylvie's eyes lingered on him, reading more than just his posture now. Maybe she saw the way his fingers curved around the paper, the way his gaze tracked the printed words, not like one reading a foreign language, but like someone glancing over an old recipe. Maybe she remembered the way the eggs had fallen into his hands earlier, the way the bulb above his head glowed a little too brightly when he cooked. Depends, she said finally, shrugging one shoulder. You made eggs. That's something. But those places? Their knives cut more than food. That's not an answer, he said. She snorted. That's the only answer you get for free. She tapped ash into the rag bucket this time, carefully, so none of it touched the gray water, and then turned away, yelling something at Marcel about inventory. Gerard caught his eye and gave a slow, deliberate nod toward the flyer. If you go, he said quietly, you don't come back. I know, Jean-Luc replied, almost whispering. It wasn't a threat. It was reality. Kitchens, like rivers, rarely flowed backward. You moved upstream, or you didn't move at all. To go from gutter to elite, then slink back? It would mark you more than never leaving. He'd watched enough careers drown on that return current. He folded the flyer in half, then in half again, making crisp creases with his thumbnail. The paper seemed to resist at first, then yielded. He slipped it into his pocket, next to the rusted paring knife. Paper and steel. Opportunity and reality, jammed together like mismatched roommates, forced to share a narrow drawer. When he stepped out of La Gutter that evening, the sky over Lyon was bruise-colored, with a last yellow leak of sun behind the buildings. The air had cooled again, though the smell of diesel and frying oil still clung near the diner, as if unwilling to let go. The neon sign over the door buzzed faintly, each flicker of the T making the rest of the word jitter, the missing letter, like a knocked-out tooth. The trucks in the lot had mostly gone. One lingered, its engine ticking as it cooled. In the distance, the city muttered to itself, footsteps on cobblestones, a dog barking, a tram whining through its turn. He stood on the curb, coat back on, fingers curled around the edges of the flyer in his pocket. The paper was warm from his body heat, slightly damp where his palm had pressed against it. The paring knife's handle pushed against the back of his hand. Between them, his skin felt like a bridge. His feet ached. His shoulders ached. A thin film of grease coated his hair, his eyelashes, the inside of his nose. Every part of him screamed for a shower hotter than any water heater in his building could provide, and for a bed that didn't bite back. But under the fatigue, under the hunger, something thrummed. He had cooked. Not for critics, not for gastrosophies, not for the guide. For men whose thumbs were flattened by years of tightening bolts, whose spines had molded to driver's seats. He had fed them something simple and perfect, and for an hour, those men had gone quiet. That was power, not the brittle kind given by stars and reviews, a different kind, older, closer to why he had first picked up a knife in some long-lost smoky kitchen. He watched his own reflection in the large window of La Gutter's dining room. It was warped by grease streaks and the curve of the glass, but recognizable. A young man, coat too big, hair a mess, face unremarkable, except for the eyes. They glinted with something that hadn't been there this morning. He held the gaze of that reflection. Well, he murmured, though his lips barely moved, you want to stay at the bottom, learn the names of every trucker on this highway, or do we climb again and risk falling harder this time? A street lamp nearby flickered to life, flooding the sidewalk with a cone of pale light, where dust and leftover drizzle turned the beam almost solid, moving like slow snow. One fleck drifted down, and in his imagination, landed on the edge of the flyer in his pocket. His hand tightened on the flyer until the paper creased. He thought of Chef Andre, the man he had been, the restaurant he had built with years of burned pans and sleepless nights, the star that had hovered just out of reach, and then finally settled above his door, only for it all to evaporate 30 seconds before reality made it official. He thought of waking up on that sagging mattress, staring at the stained tiles. He thought of the way the eggs had moved in his pan today, the way the light had brightened above his head at the first perfect fold. He thought of Sylvie's careless handoff of the flyer, the way Gerard had said, "You don't come back." He pulled the paper from his pocket and unfolded it. The words glowed faintly in the street lamp's light, bolder than they had in the greasy kitchen. L'Elite Restaurant, Lyon. He traced the letters with his thumb. In his head he heard his old master's voice, pronouncing similar names with a mix of reverence and contempt. He saw linen tablecloths, polished glassware, the ballet of service. He also saw panicked commis, broken sauces, screams, plates thrown. The world up there was brutal in its own refined way. He looked at the diner one last time. Through the window he saw Marcel's massive shape looming behind the grill again, prepping for the next round. Sylvie moved between tables, dropping plates with casual efficiency, her laughter occasionally audible, even through the glass. Gerard stretched his shoulders, his silhouette still and solid by the sink. They were part of this place, woven into it. He was not yet. He was a boy who'd walked in with a flyer and made some eggs. Tomorrow, if he vanished, the grease would go on without him. He folded the flyer again, this time more carefully, and slipped it back into his pocket. He turned his back on Le Gutter and started to walk toward the center of Lyon, toward the part of the city where stone grew cleaner, and stars, literal in the sky and metaphorical in red books, hung heavy in people's conversations. He walked. The night pressed around him, cool and sharp. The road ahead glistened under streetlights, each puddle a small, imperfect mirror. His boots splashed through them, sending ripples that distorted the reflections of lamps and buildings. Above, somewhere obscured by cloud and city light, distant stars hid, unseen but present. Faintly he felt them, the way he felt the warmth of a just-set omelette in his hands. He wasn't Chef Andre anymore. He was Jean-Luc, whoever that would turn out to be. He had no restaurant, no brigade, no official recognition, just memory in his fingers, fire in his tongue, and a stupid, stubborn refusal to stay where the world had put him. He walked, each step a defiance against the gravitational pull of the gutter. "One more time," he told the night under his breath. "We climb, but this time we do it my way." A gust of wind pushed at his back, hard enough to make him stumble forward one extra pace. Behind him, the neon at Le Gutter flickered, then steadied, its buzz fading with distance. Ahead, partially hidden by a bend in the road and the shadow of taller buildings, a tall blue door stood waiting in some other part of the city, polished brass gleaming under a different set of street lamps.